You know what really gets me? Everyone wants to know what's inside an atom, like it's a little box you can crack open. But here's the thing, nobody tells you, atoms aren't hiding anything. You're the one who's hidden. See, right now, as you're watching this, you think you're solid. You think you're here. But if I could show you what you actually look like at the atomic level, really show you, you'd see something so strange, so impossible, that your brain would reject it. Not because it's complicated, because it would mean everything you think you are is a kind of beautiful mistake. Stick with me, because once you see what I'm about to show you, you can't unsee it. And that's when things get interesting. Look, I've spent my whole life teaching physics. I've explained quantum mechanics to thousands of students. I've written equations on blackboards that describe reality with precision that would make your head spin. But you want to know something? The equations were never the hard part. The hard part was getting people to believe what the equations were telling them. Because what they're telling you is so profoundly weird, so completely at odds with everything your senses report, that your mind does everything it can to soften the blow, to make it digestible, to turn it into something comfortable, and that's exactly what I'm not going to do today. You've been taught that understanding atoms is about memorizing facts. Protons, neutrons, electrons. Maybe some quantum mechanics if you're ambitious. You learn that atoms are small, really small, and that they make up everything around you. And then you move on with your life, confident that you understand the basic building blocks of reality. But that's the trap. That's the lie we've been telling you since you were a kid. The real reason people feel disconnected from science isn't because it's hard. It's because we've stripped it of its strangeness. We've made it sterile, safe. We've taken the most mind-bending, reality-shattering discovery in human history and turned it into a multiple-choice question on a standardized test. Here's the pain nobody addresses. You walk through life feeling solid, separate, isolated. You think you're a thing, a bounded object. You end where your skin ends. You're here, the world is there, and never the two shall truly meet. And this feeling creates suffering. Real suffering. The loneliness of being a self trapped in a meat suit, disconnected from everything else. You feel like you're on the outside looking in, like there's some fundamental separation between you and the rest of existence. And you spend your whole life trying to bridge that gap, through love, through work, through achievement, through distraction, but the gap never really closes because you believe, deep down, that it's real. But atoms reveal the opposite. They reveal that there is no you in the way you think. You're not a thing, you're a process. A temporary dance of particles that don't even have locations until someone looks at them. And I'm not being poetic here. I'm not speaking in metaphors. This is what the math tells us. This is what every experiment confirms. You are not solid. You are not separate. You are not even particularly here. So what is this video going to do for you? I'm going to show you how the quantum world doesn't just change your understanding of physics, it obliterates your understanding of separation. You'll learn why the inside of an atom is mostly nothing, yet that nothing is somehow active, creative, impossibly precise. You'll see how particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until forced to choose, and what that means for your own life, what it means for your sense of possibility, what it means for your sense of being trapped or free, and most importantly, you'll feel the emotional weight of what it means to be a temporary pattern in an ocean of energy. Not as nihilism, not as some depressing realization that nothing matters, but as profound relief, as liberation, as the kind of truth that, once you really get it in your bones, changes how you move through the world. There's this myth we need to bust right here at the beginning. The myth that understanding reality makes it less magical. That once you know how something works, the wonder goes away. The opposite is true. The opposite has always been true. The more you see what atoms actually do, the more reality becomes unbearably magical. And that magic has been inside you the whole time. You've been walking around as a miracle your entire life and nobody bothered to tell you. So let's start with something simple. Let's talk about poker. Imagine you're sitting at a table, cards in your hand, chips in front of you. You're playing poker, but there's something strange about this game. Every time someone deals the cards don't have values until you look at them. Not that you don't know what they are. They literally don't decide what they are until observed. You reach for a card thinking it might be an ace or a 2, but the truth is more bizarre than that. It's both. It's all possible cards simultaneously, existing in a haze of probability, until your fingers touch it. Then, and only then, reality commits. The card chooses. The wave function collapses. What was infinite possibility becomes one single definite thing. Now, most people hear this and they think, okay, weird party trick, but what's the big deal? The big deal is this. You're not the poker player. You're the card. Every particle in your body exists in this state of beautiful uncertainty until something forces it to collapse into one reality. An electron doesn't have a position in space until you measure it. It's not that you don't know where it is. It's that it genuinely, truly, physically doesn't have a position. It's smeared out across space like a cloud of probability, and only when you observe it does it suddenly snap into being here or there. And here's where it gets emotional, where it starts to matter to your actual life. This means you've never been as fixed, as determined, as trapped as you thought you were. You're probabilistic. You're fluid. You contain multitudes until the moment you're observed, even by yourself. When you think, I am this kind of person, I always do this, I'll never be able to change that, you're collapsing your own wave function. You're taking infinite possibility and crushing it down into one narrow outcome. But the quantum world is showing you something different. It's showing you that uncertainty, that fluidity, isn't a bug in reality. It's the fundamental feature. Let me tell you why this matters. I've met so many people who feel stuck. They feel like their personality is set in stone. Their habits are unchangeable. Their future is predetermined by their past. And they're miserable because of it. They feel like they're in a prison of their own making. But they can't find the key because they don't even realize the walls are made of their own observations, their own measurements of themselves. But you're made of quantum particles. The same rules that govern electrons govern you. Now, I'm not saying you can suddenly decide to be taller or teleport across the room. The quantum effects mostly average out at the scale of your body. But the principle remains. You're not as solid as you think. You're not as fixed as you believe. Every moment you're collapsing possibilities into actuality, and you have more say in which possibilities collapse than you realize. Think about it this way. An electron in an atom doesn't orbit the nucleus like a planet around the sun, even though that's what we teach kids. It exists in a cloud of probability. It's everywhere it could be all at once. And only when you go looking for it, when you measure it, does it suddenly appear in one spot. Before that measurement, it's not hiding from you. It's genuinely in all those places simultaneously. Now, you might say, Feynman, that's insane. How can something be in multiple places at once? And my answer is, I don't know. Nobody knows. But it is. We've tested it. We've built technologies based on it. The computer or phone you're watching this on right now works because we understand and exploit quantum mechanics. Transistors, the basic building blocks of all electronics, function because electrons can tunnel through barriers they shouldn't be able to cross. They do the impossible, routinely, billions of times per second, in the device in your hand. So here's the first thing I want you to sit with. Before you measure yourself, before you collapse your own wave function by deciding I am this way, you're in superposition. You're multiple possible versions of yourself existing simultaneously. And the act of observation, the act of deciding who you are, is what makes one of those versions real. And this is where people usually get scared. Because if you're not solid, if you're just a probability cloud that happened to collapse into this particular shape, what happens when you want to change? What happens when you want to be different? What happens when the version of yourself that collapsed into being isn't the one you wanted? Hold that question. We'll come back to it. Because first, I need to show you just how not solid you really are. Picture the most beautiful cathedral you've ever seen. Massive stone pillars reaching up toward vaulted ceilings. Stained glass catching the afternoon light and throwing colors across the floor. The sense of space and structure, of permanence, of something that will outlast you and everyone you know. It feels solid, doesn't it? Eternal. Real in a way that few things feel real. Now shrink yourself down. Imagine you could become smaller and smaller. Shrink past the size of a grain of sand, past the size of a bacterium, past the size of a virus. Keep going. Smaller, smaller, until you're the size of an atom, looking up at one of those stone pillars that felt so solid just a moment ago. And what do you see? Nothing. Vast, empty space. The solid pillar is 99.9999999% emptiness. That's not an exaggeration. That's not a metaphor. That's the actual number. The stuff we think of as matter, the stuff we think of as solid, is almost entirely empty space with tiny specks of matter scattered so far apart they might as well be stars in different galaxies. If an atom were the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a marble on the 50-yard line, and the electrons would be fuzzy clouds hovering somewhere in the cheap seats. Everything else, nothing. Void. Empty. So why don't you fall through the floor? Why doesn't your hand pass through the table when you set your coffee down? If you're 99.999999% empty space, what's holding you up? Forces, fields, the electromagnetic force specifically. The electrons in your atoms and the electrons in the floor's atoms repel each other. They refuse to occupy the same space. And that repulsion, that electromagnetic push, is what you experience as solidity. You're not touching anything, not really. You're hovering just above everything you think you're touching, held up by invisible fields pushing back against each other. When you shake someone's hand, you're not actually touching them. The electrons in your hand and their hand are repelling each other, and your brain interprets that repulsion as touch. Everything you think you know about contact, about connection, about being here in the world, is a kind of elaborate illusion created by forces you can't see, acting between particles that are mostly empty space. But here's the thing that'll really mess with your head. That emptiness isn't passive. It's not just nothing sitting there doing nothing. The vacuum itself is alive. It's humming. It's full of quantum fluctuations. Particles are constantly popping in and out of existence, borrowing energy from the universe and paying it back so fast that reality doesn't have time to notice. The empty space between the particles that make you up is itself a seething foam of quantum activity. Virtual particles appearing and disappearing. Fields oscillating, potential waiting to become actual. You are that cathedral. Mostly emptiness, held together by forces you can't see, humming with invisible energy that you never asked for and can't control. And every person you've ever loved, every hand you've held, every kiss, every hug, that was emptiness touching emptiness. That was fields interacting with fields. Patterns recognizing patterns. It was never solid. It was always this fragile, impossible, beautiful arrangement of mostly nothing that somehow learned to feel everything. And doesn't that change something? Doesn't that make every connection you've ever had somehow more precious? Because it's not just unlikely that you exist, it's impossible. By all rights, you shouldn't hold together. The fact that you do, that these particles stay organized in this pattern long enough for you to have experiences and memories and thoughts, that's not just physics, that's grace. So why don't you fall through the floor? Why does any of this hold together? The answer is going to sound like magic, but it's just physics, which it turns out is the same thing. There's this principle in quantum mechanics called the Pauli exclusion principle. It says that no two electrons can occupy the same quantum state. They refuse to be identical. They refuse to occupy the same space with the same spin and energy. And this refusal, this fundamental stubbornness of electrons, is what creates the structure of atoms. It's what creates the periodic table. It's what creates chemistry and biology and you. Without the Pauli exclusion principle, all the electrons in every atom would collapse down into the lowest energy state, and atoms would be maybe 100,000 times smaller than they are. Matter as we know it wouldn't exist. There'd be no chemistry, no complexity, no life. The universe would just be a sea of collapsed atoms with no interesting structure whatsoever. But electrons refuse to collapse. They insist on being different. They insist on maintaining their identity, their uniqueness. And that insistence creates space. It creates structure. It creates the possibility for complexity. The same principle that keeps your atoms from collapsing is the principle that creates the space for you to be different, to be unique, to be you. Do you see what I'm getting at here? The physics isn't just describing reality. It's describing a kind of ethics, a kind of wisdom that's been built into the structure of existence from the beginning. The universe, at its most fundamental level, insists on difference. It insists on uniqueness. It won't allow everything to become the same. And maybe you need to hear that today. Maybe you've been feeling like you need to collapse yourself down, to make yourself smaller, to fit into some narrow space that someone else defined for you. But the universe itself is telling you something different. It's telling you that insisting on your uniqueness, on taking up space, on refusing to be identical to everyone else, isn't selfishness. It's fundamental. It's how reality works. Now let me tell you about something that bothered Einstein so much he spent the last decades of his life trying to prove it couldn't be true. It's called quantum entanglement, and it's going to shake your understanding of separation to its core. When two particles interact, when they become entangled, something strange happens. They stop being two separate things. They become one system with two parts. And here's the really weird part. If you measure one of them, if you force one to collapse from a superposition into a definite state, the other one instantaneously collapses into a corresponding state. No matter how far apart they are. You could separate them by the width of the universe, and they'd still be connected. Change one, and the other changes immediately, faster than light could travel between them. Einstein hated this. He called it spooky action at a distance. It violated everything he believed about locality, about separateness, about the speed limit of the universe. He thought it had to be wrong, that there must be some hidden mechanism, some secret information the particles were carrying with them that would explain it without requiring this impossible instantaneous connection. But he was wrong. We've tested it. Over and over again, in labs all around the world, we've proven that entanglement is real. Particles really do stay connected in this impossible way. The universe really does allow for correlations that transcend space and time. And here's what it means for you sitting there watching this. Every particle in your body was once entangled with particles that are now in other people, in trees, in oceans, in stars halfway across the galaxy. At the beginning of the universe, everything was together. Everything was connected. And as the universe expanded, as things flew apart, those connections didn't break. They just stretched. You're not a separate thing that interacts with the world. You're a knot in the world, a temporary tightening in a web that includes everything. The boundaries you think exist between you and everything else are conventions, not truths. They're useful fictions your brain creates to help you navigate reality. But at the quantum level, there are no edges. There's no clear line where you end and the world begins. You're continuous with everything. You always have been. Now I know what you're thinking. Feynman, this sounds like hippie nonsense. This sounds like some New Age crystal healing garbage. But I'm telling you, the hippies accidentally got the physics right. They just didn't have the equations. When they talked about everything being connected, about all being one, They were gesturing at something true, something that quantum mechanics confirms. They just couldn't prove it. We can. And I think this matters. I think this matters a lot. Because if you really understand that you're not separate, that you're part of a web of connection that includes everything that exists, it changes how you move through the world. It makes hurting others feel like hurting yourself, because in a very real sense they are you. It makes taking care of the world feel like taking care of yourself, because there's no meaningful distinction. But it also does something else, something maybe even more important. It ends the fundamental loneliness of existence, that feeling of being trapped inside your own head, looking out at a world you can never quite touch. That feeling is based on a lie. You're not trapped in there. You're not separate from everything else. You're woven into the fabric of reality at such a fundamental level that extraction is impossible. You're not alone. You've never been alone. You couldn't be alone if you tried. Let me give you an example of how strange this gets. There's an experiment called the double-slit experiment. You shoot photons, particles of light, one at a time through 2 slits, and watch where they hit a screen on the other side. If you don't observe which slit each photon goes through, they create an interference pattern on the screen, like waves. But if you do observe which slit they go through, they behave like particles and the interference pattern disappears. Same photons, same equipment. The only difference is whether you're watching. And somehow, impossibly, the photons know. They change their behavior based on whether they're being observed. It's like they're shy, like they perform differently when they know someone's paying attention. Now here's where it gets really weird. You can delay your decision about whether to observe the photons. You can let them pass through the slits, and then, after they've already gone through, decide whether to measure which slit they went through, and the photons will retroactively change their behavior. If you decide to measure, they'll have gone through one slit or the other like particles. If you decide not to measure, they'll have gone through both slits like waves. Your choice in the present changes what happened in the past. This isn't science fiction. This is called the delayed choice experiment, and we've done it. Reality is participatory. The universe isn't a movie that was filmed a long time ago, and you're just watching it play out. You're part of the filming. Your observations, your choices, your attention, these aren't neutral acts. They're creative acts. You're collapsing possibilities into actualities just by being conscious, just by paying attention. And what does this mean for your life? It means the way you look at things matters. The stories you tell yourself about who you are and what's possible, these aren't just narratives. They're measurements. They're observations that collapse quantum possibilities into classical realities. You've been told your problems are out there, external, fixed. But quantum mechanics suggests something wilder. The way you observe your life participates in creating your life. Your perspective isn't just about reality, it's part of reality. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying you can manifest a Ferrari by thinking positive thoughts. The universe doesn't work like that. Quantum effects mostly average out at macroscopic scales. But the principle remains. Your attention shapes your experience in ways that are more profound than you realize. The things you focus on become more real. The possibilities you believe in become more likely. Not because of magic, but because of how observation and attention work at a fundamental level. Think about your own life for a second. Think about a time when you believed something was impossible, and so you never even tried. You never even looked in that direction, and because you didn't look, because you didn't observe that possibility, it remained in superposition, neither real nor unreal, just potential. And then maybe something changed. Maybe someone you trusted told you it was possible. Maybe you had a moment of courage or desperation. And you looked, you observed, you tried, and the possibility collapsed into actuality. It became real because you paid attention to it. This happens all the time, in small ways and large. The life you're living right now is the result of countless observations, countless measurements, countless moments where you paid attention to some things and ignored others. and all those choices accumulated into the pattern you call yourself. But here's the good news. You can make different observations. You can pay attention to different possibilities. The wave function of your life hasn't fully collapsed. There's still uncertainty. There's still superposition. There are still versions of you that exist in potential, waiting for the right observation to bring them into being. You know what's really strange? Atoms are stable. Your body doesn't just randomly disintegrate. You wake up every morning more or less the same person you were when you went to bed. But why? At the quantum level, everything is chaos. Particles jumping, fields fluctuating, probabilities swirling. How does that chaos give rise to the extraordinary stability of matter? The answer is something called quantum mechanics ground states and energy levels. Particles exist in configurations that minimize energy. They fall into patterns, into states that are stable because moving out of them would require adding energy to the system. It's like a ball rolling into a valley. Once it's there, it stays there, because leaving would mean rolling uphill, and that doesn't happen without a push. The quantum weirdness that makes things uncertain is the same weirdness that makes them resilient. Particles want to be in their lowest energy states, and they resist being kicked out of those states. The chaos self-organizes into patterns, and those patterns resist disruption. This is the paradox you live. You're made of chaos, but you're stable. You're constantly changing, but you persist. You're empty space, but you feel solid. And all of these contradictions are true simultaneously. The universe doesn't choose between order and chaos. It holds both. It is both. And maybe this is the lesson you most need to hear. You don't have to resolve the contradictions in your life. You don't have to figure out how you can be both broken and whole, both lost and found, both uncertain and certain. You can be all of it. The quantum world is showing you that contradiction isn't a problem to be solved. It's the fundamental nature of reality. You can be scared and brave at the same time. You can be lonely and connected. You can be dying and being born. These aren't opposites that cancel each other out. They're complementary truths, like wave and particle, that exist together in superposition until you force yourself to choose one. And maybe the suffering comes from the forcing. Maybe the suffering comes from believing you have to be only one thing. But you don't. You never did. The atoms that make you up don't choose between being a wave and being a particle. They're both, always, until observation forces a choice. And even then, they can return to superposition. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is final. Every collapsed wave function can spread out again, given time and space. Let me tell you something about Heisenberg. Werner Heisenberg, brilliant physicist, figured out something that made Einstein crazy. He discovered that there's a fundamental limit to how much you can know about a particle. You can measure its position, or you can measure its momentum, how fast it's moving and in what direction. But you can't measure both with perfect precision at the same time. The more precisely you know where something is, the less precisely you know where it's going. The more precisely you know where it's going, the less precisely you know where it is. This isn't a limitation of our measuring tools. This isn't because we're not being careful enough. This is the universe itself telling you, you don't get to know everything. There's a fundamental uncertainty built into the fabric of reality, and no amount of technology or cleverness will let you get around it. And people hear this as a limitation. They hear this as bad news, as evidence that reality is broken, incomplete, frustratingly opaque. But flip it. The uncertainty is what allows anything to exist. If electrons had exact positions and exact momenta simultaneously, atoms couldn't form, the equations wouldn't work, chemistry couldn't happen. The universe would be a very different, much less interesting place. You couldn't be here. The uncertainty at the quantum level is the reason there's creativity in the universe. It's the reason change is possible. It's the reason you're not locked into one fate, one path, one version of yourself. The quantum world is constantly making tiny choices, tiny fluctuations, and those fluctuations bubble up into everything you experience as life. Your anxiety about not knowing the future? That's the same uncertainty that allows the future to be anything. Your frustration with not understanding yourself completely? That's the same limitation that allows you to change, to grow, to surprise yourself. Don't fight the uncertainty. It's not a bug in reality, it's the engine of possibility. I spent years trying to teach students to be comfortable with this, to understand that not knowing isn't failure. That uncertainty isn't something to eliminate, but something to embrace. And it's hard. God, it's hard, because we're wired to want certainty. We're wired to want control. We want to know where we are and where we're going, with perfect precision, all the time. But that's not how reality works. That's not how you work. And the sooner you can accept that, the sooner you can stop fighting against the fundamental nature of existence and start moving with it. Here's a practical example. You want to know if you should take a job, or leave a relationship, or move to a new city. You want certainty. You want to know, before you make the choice, what the outcome will be. But that's asking for the impossible. That's asking to violate the Heisenberg uncertainty principle of your own life. You can know where you are now, or you can know where you'll end up, but you can't know both with certainty. The act of choosing changes the trajectory. The observation creates the outcome. So what do? You make the choice anyway. You accept the uncertainty. You move forward into the unknown with the understanding that the unknown is all there ever is. Every single person who's ever made a choice, who's ever done anything worth doing, did it in uncertainty. They didn't know. They couldn't know. They chose anyway. And that's not weakness. That's not ignorance. That's courage. That's the only way forward. The quantum world has been showing you this the whole time. Uncertainty isn't the absence of reality. It's the presence of possibility. Now let's talk about something that's going to sound completely insane, but I swear to you it's true. It's called quantum tunneling. An electron or any quantum particle can pass through a barrier that it shouldn't be able to pass through. According to classical physics, if a ball doesn't have enough energy to get over a hill, it can't get to the other side. It'll roll back down. But in the quantum world, particles can tunnel through the hill. They can appear on the other side without ever having enough energy to climb over. How? Because they're not really particles. They're wave functions, probability distributions. And probability distributions don't stop at barriers. They leak through. There's a small but non-zero chance that a particle on one side of a barrier will suddenly appear on the other side. And if you have enough particles trying enough times, it happens. Routinely. Constantly. It's how radioactive decay works. It's how the sun creates energy through nuclear fusion. It's how the transistors in your computer work. The impossible happens all the time at the quantum level. Particles do things they shouldn't be able to do. They go places they shouldn't be able to go. And not occasionally, not rarely, but as a fundamental feature of how reality works. And I want you to sit with that for a second. Because you've got barriers in your life. You've got walls you think you can't get through. And maybe you're right. Maybe, classically speaking, you don't have enough energy to climb over them. But you're not classical. You're quantum. You're made of the same stuff that tunnels through barriers every single day. And while you can't consciously tunnel through a wall, macroscopic objects don't work that way. The principle remains. The impossible is more possible than you think. The barriers are more permeable than they appear. Reality has loopholes, and the quantum world exploits them constantly. Sometimes the way forward isn't over the obstacle, it's through. And it's not cheating. It's not breaking the rules. It's understanding that the rules are weirder, more flexible, more generous than you were taught. I think about this when I think about my own life. The times I succeeded weren't usually the times I had enough energy to climb over the mountain. They were the times I found a way through, a crack, a gap, a quantum tunnel in the social structures or intellectual frameworks that everyone else thought were solid. And I didn't do it by being smarter or working harder. I did it by being willing to exist in superposition long enough to find the path that others couldn't see because they'd already collapsed into one way of looking at the problem. All right, here's something I want you to try. Right now, as you're listening to this, close your eyes for a moment. Feel the chair beneath you, the air on your skin, the weight of your body. Now imagine zooming in. See your body as atoms. See those atoms as mostly empty space. See that empty space as humming with quantum activity. Hold that image. You're 99.9999999% nothing, and yet here you are, feeling everything. Now open your eyes. Look at your hand. That hand isn't solid. It's a cloud of probability that's collapsed into a temporary pattern. The atoms in it are mostly empty space, held together by forces you can't see. And yet it works. It moves when you tell it to move. It touches things. It creates things. It's been with you your whole life, and you've never really seen it for what it is. Try to move through the world with this awareness. You're not as solid as you feel. Neither is anyone else. Every interaction is fields touching fields, emptiness recognizing emptiness. See if that changes how you hold anger. See if it changes how you hold fear. See if it softens you just a little bit. Because here's what I've noticed. When you really understand, in your bones, that you're mostly empty space, it becomes harder to hold grudges. It becomes harder to treat yourself or others as if you're solid, fixed, unchangeable things. The anger and fear and judgment, they require you to believe in solidity. They require you to believe that you and others are rigid objects that can be sorted into neat categories of good and bad, right and wrong. But you're not rigid. You're fluid. You're process, not object. And so is everyone else. The person who hurt you, they're empty space too. The version of them that hurt you was a temporary configuration of particles that has already changed. They're not the same pattern now that they were then, and neither are you. The you that was hurt is a past state, a collapsed wave function that has since spread back out into superposition. I'm not saying to excuse harm. I'm not saying consequences don't matter, but I am saying that holding on to anger is like trying to grab smoke. The thing you're angry at doesn't exist anymore. Not really. It was a pattern that has since shifted. And the energy you're spending on holding that pattern in your mind, on keeping it solid and real, is energy you could spend on something else, on creating new patterns, on collapsing different possibilities into being. Here's another practice. Once a day, write down one thing about yourself that feels fixed. Something like, I'm bad at math, or I'm too old to change, or I'll never be confident. Just one thing. Write it down. And then underneath it write this. Before observation, I'm in superposition. Because you are. Right now, before you measure yourself, before you collapse your own wave function by deciding who you are, you contain possibilities you haven't observed yet. The quantum world does this constantly. Particles exist in all possible states until measured. So can you. The story you're telling yourself about who you are, it's a measurement. It's an observation. And observations create reality. So what if you made different observations? What if you measured different things about yourself? What if you paid attention to the possibilities you usually ignore? I'm not talking about positive thinking or affirmations or any of that surface-level stuff. I'm talking about genuine, quantum-level uncertainty. About holding yourself lightly enough that you can be surprised by who you might become. About refusing to collapse prematurely. About staying in superposition just a little bit longer than is comfortable. Because here's what I've learned. The people who change, who really transform, aren't the ones with the most willpower or the most discipline. They're the ones who stay uncertain the longest, who refuse to decide too quickly who they are, who keep observing themselves with curiosity rather than judgment, who understand that they're not a fixed thing, but a process, and processes can shift direction. Let me tell you one more story. When I was younger, I thought I had to be one thing: a physicist, a scientist, someone who dealt in facts and equations and certainties. And I was good at it. I won awards, I made discoveries, I built a reputation as someone who could explain difficult things clearly. But there was this other part of me that wanted to play the bongos, to draw, to joke around, to not take everything so seriously. And for a while I thought I had to choose. I thought I had to be the serious scientist or the playful artist, but not both. And then I realized, why? Who made that rule? The quantum world doesn't choose between being a wave and being a particle. It's both. So why can't I be both serious and playful, both rigorous and creative, both the physicist and the bongo player? So I stopped choosing. I stopped collapsing that part of my wave function. And you know what happened? I became more myself, not less. The physics got better because I approached it with playfulness. The art got better because I approached it with rigor. The apparent contradiction was actually a complementarity. The tension was actually creative. You've got contradictions in you, too. Parts of yourself that seem incompatible. And you've probably been trying to choose between them, to resolve them, to be one thing. But what if you don't have to? What if the contradiction is the point? What if you can hold both the way a particle holds both wave nature and particle nature, and let the observation determine which one emerges when? This is what the quantum world has been trying to teach us all along. Reality is weirder than we thought, more flexible, more generous, less interested in our neat categories, and more interested in possibility. And we're part of that reality. We're not separate from it. We're expressions of it. So the weirdness, the flexibility, the generosity, that's available to us too. Here's something else you can do. Pick one person you love. Think about them for a moment. Now remember, you're not separate from them. Your particles were entangled with theirs, with everyone's, at the birth of the universe. You've never not been connected. The separateness is an illusion. So try this. When you think of them, don't think, I'm here, they're there. Think, we're two densities in the same field. Feel the difference. It turns gratitude from a nice feeling into physics. It turns love from an emotion into truth. And maybe that's too much. Maybe that's too weird. But I'm telling you, it works. When you really feel in your body that you're not separate from the people you love, it changes everything. It makes their joy your joy, their pain your pain. Not in a codependent way, but in a real, physical, quantum mechanical way. You're not two separate things that happen to care about each other. You're two patterns in one field, two notes in one song. And this extends beyond people. You're entangled with trees, with oceans, with the air you breathe. Every breath you take contains atoms that were once in dinosaurs, in ancient trees, in the bodies of people who lived thousands of years ago. You're breathing in the universe and breathing out yourself constantly, and the line between the two has never been clear. So what does it mean to harm the environment? It means harming yourself. What does it mean to heal the world? It means healing yourself. Not metaphorically. Literally. You're continuous with everything. There are no edges. The boundaries are conveniences, not truths. I think this is why people feel so lost sometimes. We've been taught that we're separate, that we're isolated individuals floating through an uncaring universe, trying to make our own meaning, trying to survive on our own. And that's exhausting. That's terrifying. That's unbearably lonely. But it's not true. It's never been true. The physics shows us something different. You're part of a web of connection that includes everything that has ever existed. You're not alone. You're not separate. You're held by forces you can't see, connected to things you'll never meet, participating in a dance that started 13.8 billion years ago and will continue long after you're gone. And that's not nihilism. That's not depressing. That's the most hopeful thing I know, because it means you matter. Not because you're special or chosen or better than anyone else, but because you're part of the whole, and the whole includes you. You couldn't not matter if you tried. You're woven too deeply into the fabric of everything. Let me bring this together. We started with atoms. We looked inside them and found nothing. Mostly empty space, held together by forces and fields. And we learned that you're made of that nothing. You're 99.9999999% emptiness. And yet here you are, experiencing everything. We learned that particles exist in superposition until observed, that you're more fluid, more uncertain, more full of possibility than you ever imagined, that the act of observation creates reality, which means your attention matters. Where you look, what you measure, what you believe in. These aren't passive acts, they're creative acts. You're collapsing possibilities into actualities every moment of every day. We learned about entanglement, about the way particles stay connected across space and time, about the way you're not separate from anything, not really. The boundaries are conventions. The separateness is an illusion. You're continuous with everything. We learned about uncertainty, about the way the universe won't let you know everything, about the way that uncertainty isn't a bug but a feature, not a limitation, but the engine of possibility, about the way not knowing is what allows the future to be anything. And we learned about stability, about the way chaos self-organizes into patterns, about the way you can be made of chaos and still persist, about the way contradictions don't need to be resolved, about the way you can hold multiple truths simultaneously, the way a particle holds wave nature and particle nature, and let the context determine which emerges. So what does all this mean? What are you supposed to do with this information? Here's what I think. I think you're supposed to hold yourself more lightly, to understand that you're not as fixed as you think, that you're process, not object, that you contain possibilities you haven't measured yet, that the story you're telling yourself about who you are is just one possible collapse of your wave function, and you can make different observations that lead to different outcomes. I think you're supposed to hold others more lightly too, to see them as process, not object, to understand that the version of them you're interacting with right now is a temporary configuration that will change. That holding grudges is like trying to grab smoke, that everyone is doing their best to stay organized in the face of quantum chaos, and sometimes that's messy, and that's okay. I think you're supposed to trust uncertainty, to understand that not knowing isn't failure, that the future being open is a gift, not a curse, that the anxiety you feel about the unknown is the same energy that powers possibility. Channel it. Use it. Let it move you forward instead of freezing you in place. And I think you're supposed to feel connected. Really feel it. Not as a nice idea, but as a physical fact. You're not separate from anything. You're part of a web that includes everything. And that means you're held. You're supported. You're never alone. The universe isn't happening to you. You're happening along with it, as it, through it. You're not broken. You've just been measuring yourself wrong. You've been treating yourself like a solid object when you're actually a fluid process. You've been telling yourself you're fixed when you're actually in superposition. You've been believing you're separate when you're actually entangled with everything. You're not separate. You've just been taught to ignore the fields. You've been taught to see the boundaries as real when they're actually conventions. You've been taught that your skin is an edge when it's actually a fuzzy transition zone where you gradually become the world. You're not stuck. You're in superposition, and the next observation hasn't happened yet. The wave function of your life hasn't fully collapsed. There are still possibilities that exist in potential, waiting for the right moment, the right attention, the right courage to bring them into being. You're made of the same stuff as stars, as light, as the quantum foam that bubbles beneath reality. You're not small. You're not separate. You're not solid. You're something much stranger, much more beautiful than that. You're a temporary impossibility that learned to wonder at itself. You're a pattern in the universe that became conscious enough to ask questions about the universe. You're a way for the cosmos to know itself. And that's not just physics. That's grace. That's miracle. That's the kind of thing that should stop you in your tracks and make you weep with the sheer improbability and beauty of it. So here's what I want you to do. If this shifted something in you, if you felt the atoms in your body differently for even a moment, if you saw yourself or the world with new eyes, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Not for me, not for the algorithm, but as a little quantum measurement, as a collapse of possibility into, yes, this mattered, as a way of observing yourself and making it real. And drop a comment. Tell me which idea hit you hardest. Was it the emptiness, the entanglement, the superposition, the uncertainty? I'm curious. I want to know what resonated. Because these conversations, these exchanges of ideas, they're entanglements too. They're ways we stay connected across space and time. Your comment becomes part of the wave function of this video, of this moment, of this shared exploration of what it means to be made of atoms that don't make sense. And if you want more of this, if you want to keep looking under reality's hood together, subscribe. Because there's so much more strangeness to explore. There's quantum field theory and relativity and the weirdness of time and the mystery of consciousness and 1,000 other ways that reality refuses to behave the way we expect it to. And I'm not done showing you. I'm not done trying to give you the gift that physics gave me, the understanding that the universe is weirder, more beautiful, more generous, more alive than you ever imagined. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being willing to sit with the impossibility for a little while. Thank you for being the temporary pattern of quantum fluctuations that you are, for lasting long enough to have this moment, for caring enough to wonder about what you're made of. Now go be the impossible thing you are. Go be the quantum mystery that learned to love and laugh and ask questions. Go be mostly empty space held together by invisible forces and see what happens. Go collapse some wave functions. Go observe some possibilities into being. Go tunnel through some barriers that shouldn't be crossable. Go be quantum. Go be you. They're the same thing anyway.